Welcome to the Mind Rebel podcast. This is our Legacy Lived series, where we explore how legacy is shaped in real time through everyday choices, relationships, and the way people show up in their homes, their work, and the communities that they serve. This series is an invitation to reflect on how legacy is formed, not someday, but now. Before we dive in and I introduce our guest today, I just want to take a moment to really name what we're honoring in this series. When we talk about legacy here, we're not talking about outside achievements and titles or really what someone builds outwardly. We're talking about what happens when a human being learns how to relate to themselves with awareness, with integrity, with care, and how that way of being really shapes their life over not just, a defined period of time, but over the rest of the course of their life. So legacy is lived in how someone navigates the complexities of the world, the complexities of life, the unknowns of life. It's how they're able to stay present or at least find their way back to presence within themselves when things get uncertain. It's in how they move through their work, through their relationships, their responsibilities without abandoning themselves. So at the MRA, we've always held that coaching skills and what we teach here are really important human skills. They're not just for people who want to start a coaching business. They're for anyone who understands that how we think, how we listen, how we respond, how we relate to others really matters in every single area of life. And that understanding is especially embodied in today's conversation. Megan is a graduate from our very first cohort at the Mind Rebel Academy. She graduated back in 2019. She didn't necessarily enter coach training with the intention of, leaving a job and becoming a coach. She entered because she saw and felt how essential these skills were for just being human in this world, being human in the world, in her work, and in her life. So years later, the impact continues to unfold and her impact in the world continues to unfold. And so today we're here to share a little window into Megan's story.
Thanks, Taryn. It's so exciting to be here.
It's so lovely to have you here. So Megan, before we dive in, what is it, when I reflect those words back to you and kind of frame, sometimes when we're in the day-to-day of our life, it's hard to even imagine that in these daily moments and in these lived moments of our lives, we are leaving a legacy, and legacy is lived today. What does it feel like to have that reflected back to you?
It's interesting because as I was thinking and reflecting back on my MRA journey in preparation for this, a lot of what you just said is what I realized was true. So it's like, you kind of go through these different journeys in your life. And, I know we talk about the hero's journey in the Mind Rebel, and that is kind of true in a lot of, stories that we see, movies that we watch. There's always that common hero's journey. And I found, it's interesting because you can have multiple heroes' journeys at the same time. And the types of skills that, you learn through the MRA and learned through my experience with you and with the coaching and the practitioner training, some of those things I had before, and I did what I feel a very good job at kind of starting my life and jumping into passions and experiences and things like that. But then once you kind of build those more foundational skills and kind of feel like it was like tuning into what those skills can really do to help move you forward and identify where you are in that journey, if that makes sense. So for me, as I was reflecting back, it was like, like you said, I didn't necessarily come into this to step into coaching. I came into it to really get a deeper understanding of myself, my life's path, and then how do I better connect with people around me. Like one of my core values is connection and connection with people and even connection with animals. And so, part of that is I've always been an extroverted person. I've always been a conversationalist, but like, how could I be better at that? And how could I connect with people on a deeper level? And how can that bring more value and kind of like better my life in a whole? So I think it's been an interesting legacy to look back and see where I started when, I kind of entered into the MRA realm, and then how I've really evolved during that time. And then since that time through lots of paths and journeys and trials and tribulations and opportunities of life.
You talked about the hero's journey. I just want to touch on that a little bit. Some people listening might know what we're talking about. Some might be like, what are they talking about? What's the hero's journey? So I just want to frame that because it is a useful tool, the hero's journey. So the hero's journey, it was developed by Joseph Campbell, and he developed this story structure of how the protagonist of a story, the hero, moves through these various stages of their hero's journey. And you see this depicted in movies, you see it depicted in novels, and it is timeless and cross-cultural, and it's just a really beautiful frame. And I remember when I learned about the hero's journey, I remember thinking, like, this is the exact journey we all go through when we ourselves are moving through deep periods of growth and evolution within ourselves. I like to imagine that we are ever evolving beings. Like, we are meant to continue to grow and evolve. If we're not growing, if we're staying put, I think this is universal, but you feel stagnant, you feel stuck, you feel like, and that's because like we're constantly being asked to grow and to evolve ourselves. And the hero's journey, every hero begins in what's called the ordinary world. So that is the ordinary structures of life. Everyone's, ordinary world looks different, what that means for you in the current phase of your hero's journey. And then there is a call to adventure. Maybe that's a yearning for something, for a change, or for a new way of being in the world, or for a new level of leadership in your life, or for a new relationship in your life. Like, it could be absolutely anything. It could be anything. And you could have multiple hero's journeys going at once in your own life. But it's just such a helpful frame because you can put your finger on a name. What's this call to adventure I hear? Because we know that the call to adventure first begins as like an inner yearning, an inner tug, an inner pull. And if we ignore that, it becomes more of a scream. And if we ignore that, it might manifest as like a problem in our life, or, or something happening where it's like life is trying to get our attention because life wants us to move forward. Life wants us to evolve and wants us to accept the call to adventure on our hero's journey. And so if we don't pay attention to the inner little nudges inside that are inviting us to step into this next hero's journey, life will do its work to get our attention. Then once a hero says yes to their hero's journey, there's all sorts of stages that follow. So they cross the threshold from the known world and into the unknown world. And in the unknown world, there's all sorts of trials and failures and deaths and rebirths. And, it's such a chaotic and painful, painful time because
new.
You're going into something new. Old ways of being are shedding, dying, sometimes painfully, and it's leaving space for new ways of being. And there's sometimes that liminal space in between of like, well, I don't even know who I am anymore or what, and then the hero, of course, makes it through the death and rebirth and then back up to the arrival, back into the ordinary world as this new expression or version of themselves. So I just wanted to paint that context because I think it frames your journey beautifully.
Can I actually step that? Because it's really funny when I was reflecting on it. I'm like, how I got into the MRA sphere was a little bit of a hero's journey. So kind of bring us back to like 2019. And then for additional context, like I knew you as you had kind of left corporate, stepped into a full-time coaching role. I remember being like, oh, that's amazing. Go Tara. Like she's doing one-on-one coaching. That's so cool. And I had just in kind of 2019, I had just come out of a pretty difficult period. So early 20s university for me was like super aligned. I found a passion early on. I was really interested in the continent of Africa. I ended up there was a brand new program that got created in year 2 of university for African studies. And I was just on this roll. I had a perfect network. I had all the energy. I was having all these great experiences. I lived in Rwanda for a year. And then I came back to Canada where I live and started my 9-to-5 corporate job, which is where we originally crossed paths. And the first several years of that job were fantastic. Still had the great energy, the great flow, felt like I really found a good spot and a purpose, and started dating somebody and then, let's call it 5 or so years in, switched a role within the job that I was in, didn't particularly love where I was at work and kind of the energy in that new role. Relationship was challenging. I had some friend challenges at that time. And you talk about, when you're feeling stuck and when, you're at a point where whether it's the universe or your body or whoever is saying like, this isn't it. Like there's something here that you're not comfortable with. And like you said, it starts whispering at you, you don't feel comfortable. You don't want to go to the job in the morning, or not feeling comfortable at home in the relationship or whatever it might be. There's kind of those little whispers that turn into like bigger nudges that turn into the screams. And for me at that point, it did become a physical reaction. And I know this happens for a lot of people where it ends up being your health that starts being the screaming factor. And so for me, it came in the form of not being able to eat. And so I literally started developing all of these sensitivities to food and like healthy foods. Like it's not your regular, like don't eat junk. It was like strawberries and avocados and like all the good stuff that you like to eat. And it, kept manifesting. And I didn't necessarily connect it to food at the beginning, but I just couldn't get through a day without being in excruciating pain with my stomach, with my lower back. And then that kept getting worse and worse. So it ended up developing into vertigo, which I'd never experienced in my life. I ended up developing into anxiety, which I had also been very fortunate to never experience, but I was just getting, crazy heart racing, would find myself doing deep breathing in the middle of the day, got a lot of headaches, like big pressure headaches. And it got to the point where I was like, this is insane. Like I can't get through a day without being unpleasant, and it made it really hard to do anything because you don't want to be around people when you're not feeling great or any of that. So had gone to my doctor, done all the regular tests. Obviously nothing turned up. And then it was through another colleague at work that recommended I go to a holistic doctor. And so this holistic doctor, we spent a good amount of time together, talked about everything from the beginning of my life till now in terms of health and what changed and so on. And ultimately, and thankfully through another friend, I had started doing a bit of an elimination diet to try to figure out which foods were causing problems. So I had a bit of an idea at that time. Like I knew strawberries, I knew avocados, I knew like a few other things. But what was really interesting was in the conversations with the holistic doctor, he said, to me, it sounds like you have a histamine intolerance. And so what a histamine intolerance typically is, naturally we have histamine in our digestive system, and that's totally normal. But when you start adding different things and stressors and so on in life, our histamine levels in our body can rise. It is like an immune response to stress or problems. It's a signal to the brain that something is wrong. But histamine is inflammation, really. Like if you have allergies, you take an antihistamine to reduce that inflammation. So he said, when we have too much histamine in the body, it starts showing up as headaches, vertigo, anxiety, digestion problems. And so he said, a few of the foods that you've mentioned, actually all the foods I'd mentioned, were high in histamine or histamine producers if you eat them. And so anyways, he said, the key factor here is you've mentioned that you have stress in the workplace, stress in a romantic relationship, and stress in friendships. The one core part of your life that's not stressful right now is family, but every other core piece of your life, you're met with stress. And so he said, number one is get you on a low histamine diet because that's the simplest way to get you out of pain. But number two is you're going to need to fix these parts of your life. So naturally, next step was I was already in the works of switching the job. So that was great. Had the relationship, like the romantic relationship, come to an end. Friend things kind of settled. And then I had that call to go back to Africa. And so thankfully through work, I had the opportunity to go on a 4-month secondment to Zambia. And leading up to that, I said, I've done so much work. Like I've done so much work to remove all of this and try to get back to how I felt in my 20s, my early 20s, when I was like super aligned with my life and so excited with where I was going. And I said, there's still one piece that's missing. Like I still don't feel like I'm back at my 100%, early 20s Megan self. And so that's when I reached out to you and said, oh, you know what? Taryn does life coaching. Maybe I need a life coach. And I said, Taryn, this is kind of what I'm doing. I'm about to go to Zambia on this 4-month placement. And I'm curious what one-on-one coaching would be and if I could do it virtually. And you said, yes, I have a program, which is exactly 4 months. and I'd be happy to do it virtually. And so that just felt serendipitous. Like, how is it that your program is the exact timeline of what I'm about to embark on in Zambia? We could do it virtually. And so for me, I thought of the hero's journey of like, I was going through this hard time, body was screaming, made the changes. And then when you kind of start that new journey again, it's like that call to adventure. I was called back to go back to Africa, this time Zambia. And at first I refused the call. And then I was like, nope, we're going to do this. We're going back. And that's usually when you meet a mentor or your mentor appears. And for me, that was you. It was that one-on-one coaching program of like, Taryn's my mentor to kind of move me through that. And so those 12 weeks were transformative in so many ways. Like, obviously I'm in a new country, I'm in new experiences. It's all the things that I love, but also having those weekly connection points with you and the reflection. Like, I had so much time to reflect and do a lot of this work. I always remember one thing that you said to me at that time, because as we go through the hero's journey, you kind of have that death and rebirth and you're working through your things. And then you come out as kind of this newer version or next best version of yourself, however you want to label it. But often that's a little bit different because you've now experienced all of what you've experienced. And so you're not going to be the same person that you were in your early 20s. And I remember I kept getting stuck on that in our one-on-one coaching. Was I said, I just want to get back to how I felt when I was in my early 20s. And I felt really energized and aligned and like forward momentum, and everything was happening for me. And the universe was just like, my mom used to say I had a golden horseshoe up my butt. And so I just want to get back there. But you said to me, you're like, that's part of your life. But what if now you've evolved into a new shifted version or a different version? Like, what if you're not meant to always be early 20s Megan? What if you're meant to be now late 20s Megan and then 30s Megan? Like, what does that look like for you? So that was the first, inroads into you. And then naturally, after finishing that one-on-one program, I said to you, I don't want this to end. I want to learn this methodology that you had me work through in these 12 weeks so that I can bring that into my conversations with family, with friends, with colleagues, with, not necessarily clients per se, but a little bit. And that was when you said, well, that's great because I'm launching a practitioner and coach training program. So
yeah.
It was awesome.
I love how you brought me back down memory lane there. I was having all sorts of memories of our one-on-one coaching time together. And I really do remember how much you wanted to get back to early 20s Megan.
Mm-hmm.
And how there was a pretty big shift in your energy and awareness when you did realize that, wait, yes, there were qualities about that time in your life that you wanted to capture and embody again and feel again. But you are not early 20s Megan. And just like going back to the concept of the hero's journey, that we are constantly growing and evolving, and we're in constant iteration of ourselves. So with every hero's journey we take, the context will be different, whether it's saying yes to an adventure abroad, saying yes to a new job. I don't know. It could be absolutely anything. It could also be much
Motherhood,
smaller.
it could be friendships, it could be relationships, like it could be
Friendships, leave a relationship, say yes to a relationship, trust again. It's like, but every single one of the things that are calling us to our next hero's journey are the experiences that are going to shape us into the next iteration of who we're becoming. I really think this is what it's all about. I think that's what we're here to do. I think we're constantly growing and evolving into the next expression of who we are.
right.
And these heroes' journeys invite us into the process of growth that shapes us, sometimes painfully, in the process of that becoming. And so knowing what you know now, and of course, hindsight is always 2020. As you look back on this, what's the difference between early 20s Megan and the Megan that you are today?
Had this a lot too, because I feel like I just went through another one of those periods where it was like, sluggish, and it was hard. And I'm kind of at that other end where I feel like I'm coming out and the energy's coming back and we're kind of moving into that next chapter. I've done a lot of reflection on this, but I feel like I was lucky in my early 20s that I found that path. Like a lot of people kind of pick something. So you're going into university and you just got to, I don't know, pick something to study and hope that it works out for you. But, I was lucky that I had found that, and it did mold me into a lot of who I am today. Like it did offer me incredible opportunities. I became a professional like a lot quicker than had I maybe not found that path. I was opened up to a lot of incredible people and opportunities, and it was great. And I still have that. And so it's not lost on me that like early 20s Megan is still at the core of who I am. That's just who I am as a human. I love that forward momentum. I love learning. I love connecting with people. I love new experiences, but you got to go through hard times. And I think early 20s Megan, I wasn't really emotional. Like I was just happy and I had a really positive life. And, sure, I've had people pass away early on, or like my grandpa when I was 16 or something, but I don't think I ever really connected in with emotion super deeply before then. I wasn't one to ever cry in movies, or I don't know, cry just for the sake of crying. And then the time that I went through one-on-one coaching with you, and then especially the MRA, like I only signed up for practitioner training like anybody ever does that doesn't have the life goal of being a coach. And I signed up for practitioner training. And then naturally, as practitioner training was coming to a close, I think there was only 2 of us left that hadn't signed up for coach training. And I was like, I can't leave this group of women. At the time we were all women. I was like, I can't leave this. This is like the safest, most supported, most holistic container I've ever been privileged to be a part of. I can't live without this. And once we finally completed all of like that program, I had been through so much, like I had these experiences. I had like my first real romantic relationship work and then come to a close. I've had big career shifts. I went through like health challenges and came out through the other side, and then had these really deep, nurturing discovery and like holistic conversations through coaching, and then through practitioner training, and then through learning to be a coach. And that kind of cracked me wide open in terms of being able to feel a realm of emotions. And so what I realized is that now I'm like super emotional. So, I'll be mostly really happy. And if I see other people being happy, like I'll cry because I'm like, oh, that's so nice that they found love, or that's so nice that they found their passion. But I'm also not afraid to like recognize that there's a lot of challenging times in life too. And it's okay to take time to experience those. I like to talk about astrology a lot. I'm an Aries, and I'm very much like an Aries sun. And so I'm very much Aries energy, very outgoing, very like, it's all about passion and purpose and fire and momentum when I'm aligned, like when I've got the energy going. But more recently, I started looking at the other placements, and I'm a Pisces moon, and I'm like, oh, no wonder I have this like emotional undertone and like the ability to cry now at the sight of something nice or something sad. And so I think you just become more of a whole person as you progress through those lives. Like my 20s were great and ups and downs. And then, I'm now 37, like my 30s were real, like that's when you experience, maybe some people experience at different times, but a lot of people experience in their 30s, like the real toughness of life. And so having the ability to kind of sit and reflect on those things and even coach myself through a lot of those moments was super important. But I think also just recognizing like, these are all parts of being human. You've got to feel all the things. You can't just always be happy and forward and aligned and striving. You can also sit with difficulty and challenges and heartache, and that's important too.
Yeah. It's also what helps to shape who we're becoming,
And it also, like, I know I talk about connectivity a lot as being important to me. And it's also one of those things that's allowed me to connect deeper with so many more people.
Right.
Like before I was great at connecting with people, but it was usually positive energy. People were always like, oh, you're so positive, and like you bring so much positive light. But now it's like you can have deeper connections and deeper conversations, and, and that just makes you more human and experience more humanity, which is really special.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think it was that cracked you open to your emotions? You named kind of the environment that was needed for you to touch that. What do you think it was for you?
I think it was experiencing vulnerability in a different way. So I always thought that for me, vulnerability was like, I'm an open book usually, like I'd be happy to share a lot of things. But it was those times that we had during practitioner and coach training where, yes, we're learning things, we're learning the methodology, we're learning coaching skills, but we're having some pretty vulnerable conversations. And during that program, again, we were a group of women and people were sharing like difficult stuff. Like you even shared difficult stuff during that time. It wasn't just learning, it was like holding space for each other and having that safe space to share what you're working through. And then also to recognize that, like, why am I feeling this way? And like kind of peel that onion a little bit deeper. And so I think that's part of it. I think too, definitely more recently, like in the last 5 or so years, it's been family health that's been kind of the challenge that we've been working through. And so naturally, like that just changes things for you. Like my dad was sick for a little while during the pandemic, and like, that was a whole challenge in and of itself. But then when your dad has kind of a stroke and a cardiac event and then is hospitalized and you're kind of working through that, like that's the first experience of I might be losing a parent for me, which is challenging. And so then you feel kind of all of that and the energy that takes, and like, it's just going through the challenges that life presents itself, and you kind of get cracked open because you're like, this is hard.
It is. Life can be very, very hard.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And at that time too, I was in another job where it was really hard. It was taking a lot out of me. So energy wise, I was already depleted. Then you have family health, and then you're in a pandemic, which was super weird and lasted a really long time here in Canada. And, it's just, you're just like, oh, really? And then, I'm in my mid 30s. So at that time I was like, let's buy a house. Let's do all these things. So like, let's work through what that's like. And so, yeah, at one point you're just like, wow, okay. Yeah. I've really experienced a lot of things.
Life got real.
Life got real. Yeah. A lot of good things in there too, but like, it gets real. Yeah.
It does get real. Yeah. You talked about like how meeting life and meeting difficult moments and moving through challenging moments and also moving through joyful moments. Relationships are such an important part of your life and who you are, and that connectivity that you were describing. How have the skills that you learned helped to shape those relationships moving through the good and the challenging aspects of life?
The one that I use, and I probably don't say it in my head anymore, but I've embodied it now. It was so important, especially like through pandemic and just everyday life really, is I am whole, capable, resourceful, and creative, and others are whole, capable, resourceful, and creative. And why that's been so important to me is, you know, well, there's probably another layer to that. But when I think about other people, I used to maybe not be as curious as to why people show up the way that they do. Like, you know, sometimes people are in great moods. Other times people say stuff or show up in a different way and you're kind of like, ugh, it was a weird experience, or like, what's wrong with that person? Yeah. Yeah. And so naturally, like, coaching skills teach you to be curious and to try to, you know, again, peel a bit of the onion, not necessarily all the time, but, you know, I find now I'm more, maybe empathetic is the word, to other people and how they show up. Maybe if they're not showing up in as good of a light, if I can word it that way. Like, I find I tend to be like, I wonder what's going on. And then if I'm lucky enough to know them, then I can usually kind of think, you know, maybe X happened and maybe that's how they're feeling now. And I don't actually say that to them all the time, but like, you know, it does help so that I don't take it as an attack on me. You know, they are human too. They're probably going through something today. And, you know, that's why that's showing up that way. So I think one, it's a little bit of that. It's that, you know, you don't take people's responses or reactions, especially during challenging times, too much to heart anymore, because you can kind of put yourself in their shoes a little bit by being curious and seeing, you know, they're probably exhausted. They're probably going through these emotions too. But the whole capable, resourceful, and creative lesson has really been extremely helpful too, because so now I did my coaching journey, and then naturally in the last several years, I ventured into my counseling therapy journey. And so, you know, in those conversations, what was funny is my counselor always says to me, you know, you're a bit of a fixer. I guess I never really thought about myself that way, but it is kind of true. Like, I have a lot of patience. I know they say Aries people tend to be very impatient. I have a lot of patience as an individual, but where I don't necessarily have patience sometimes is when I can see why somebody's stuck somewhere, or they're not like moving through something. And then I can get a little bit like, here's your solution, like, just go do it, you know? And that's not really the right energy to bring forward. Like, I know that, like, when I get into challenging times, like when you and I started doing one-on-one coaching, it was like, oh, there's still something here. I'm not getting to where I need to be. Who can I tap into? Like, how can I be resourceful to help move myself forward? Oh, Taryn's there. She's doing one-on-one coaching. Great. Let's do that. There's lots of moments in my life where I have been resourceful and to kind of move myself through. But there's, of course, areas where I wish that I have been a bit more bold and I have like just taken that step and gone forward. And so I think what I've really had to learn is like, yes, people are whole, capable, resourceful, and creative, and therefore it's not for you to fix things for them. It can be that I can, you know, shine lights on potential pathways or like hold space for them when they need it. But I don't need to fix, and I don't need to, I think for me in the last several years, it was like protecting energy, because I just felt like I didn't have any, right? Like, especially when you're going through those moments of like a parent being sick and you're kind of all rotating between hospital visits. And then my grandma was sick and we did the same thing again. And, you know, like, you just don't have the energy to offer others at that time, and you'll hold space where you can. But, you know, it was important for me to realize they're whole, capable, resourceful, and creative. They have the same like access to resources and support if and when they need it. And you don't need to be the solution all of the time. And then same for myself. Like, I don't need to solve everything for myself in that moment. If I need space too, to just be and recharge and relax. That's been a big shift for me in the last, I think probably pandemic helped me get a little bit more familiar with what it's like to be at home and be a little bit more of a homebody. Before any lockdowns, I was always out. I was always doing things. I never spent time at home. I never watched TV. I never did any of that. I was always Energizer Bunny doing stuff. But that has been a bit of a gift of like, now I enjoy having some cozy nights and resting and recharging when I need it. And I still love going out and doing fun things, but it's just, I guess, having that awareness of what is it that I need in this moment, and like, how can I honor that for myself? And it doesn't always mean that it needs to be solved or it needs to be moved forward. It can mean that I just need to sit with it.
Yeah. And it's only when you accept that for yourself, that you're able to, I'm saying you're, but I'm meaning like anyone, us as humans, when we can be with ourselves, when we can be with our own emotions, when we can honor our own body's need for rest or recharge or not solving or not fixing. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, when we can honor when it's time to, generate that support for yourself or go fix that problem or move forward in forward action, when we can first and foremost go inside of ourselves to check in with what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to give that so much easier to others.
Mm-hmm.
We say in the MRA, you can only go as deep with another as you're willing to go within yourself. So, for coaches, that's important, because for coaches, you want to be able to hold space for people to tell the truth, to feel safe enough with you to tell the truth about how they're feeling and what's coming up for them. And yes, there are skills to help artfully guide that out of them through powerful questions and curiosity. Mm-hmm. But the greatest capacity to be able to sit with another human in the midst of, their own, whatever it might be, mm-hmm. is for us to be able to sit with our own inner worlds, so that when we feel comfortable with our inner worlds, we feel comfortable holding space for others as they navigate theirs.
Yeah. And it's one of those really important skills as a coach too, of like, you're not embodying that energy that they're going through. Like, it's not your experience. I think sometimes as humans, we sometimes see somebody's reaction to something or somebody's emotion, and either we're not comfortable experiencing that because, however your life has set you up, maybe you're not comfortable witnessing other people's emotions, or you feel like you need to relate to it somehow. And you don't need to relate. You just need to understand that that person's working through that. And it's wonderful that you can be there for them. And that, like you said, you can feel safe to kind of share with you. I know your original question too was a little bit of how some of these skills have kind of helped me through walks of life. And I know I'm talking a little bit more about the hardship parts, but I think the one that's been really interesting for me is from a professional side. And so I've always been in relationship management. I mostly work with companies, my jobs. And so I've always had kind of those one-on-one relationship conversations with companies and with different professionals and so on. I've always been in a networking type role. And so always speaking to a number of people throughout the day. And I've always been great at that. There was a training that I got really early on, a sales training early on in my career that was, I believe it was called spin selling. And it was really like, instead of...
I did that with you. I remember spin selling. I checked out. That was like so not my world. I was like, oh gosh.
Yeah. That was probably when you were like exiting. And that's when I was like, I love my job.
Yes.
Please
continue.
I still think of it today because it was helpful for me in my role. I did have a sales role, but it really, like, the essence of it is that you don't come into a call with a product to sell. You come into a call with a curiosity of what clients'
it's a great message
or opportunities are, right? And then the client is meant to identify what it is that they need. And then you can hopefully match up, a product in the end with it. And so that always led me to have good conversations with clients. I wasn't starting a call with like, hey, I've got insurance. Do you want to buy it? I was starting a call with, what's going on in your business and what is it that keeps you up right now? And what are you working through? And then we would talk about solutions, and, clients tend to appreciate that because it doesn't feel like you're pitching them something. So that was a great skill. But what coaching skills afforded me, like I said earlier on, was like the curiosity, like the deep curiosity. I've always been a bit of a curious human, but like now I'm a deeply curious human. Like I'm curious about people. I'm curious about what's happening outside in nature. I'm curious about why animals are doing things. Like I'm deeply curious, and I love that. The authentic listening is huge. And so authentic listening being that you can kind of turn off your thinking and your brain from anything else that's happening and just solely be paying attention to the person that you're speaking with has been massive. And feel like I can really do that in person with people. Like sometimes people will say to me, like, I feel like when you're speaking, like you're really listening to me, like you're never distracted. And sometimes that's nice. And then sometimes it feels intense for people because they're used to people being distracted. But it was also essential because so much of work now is virtual that, you get into these video calls with people and people are sending emails and doing their phone stuff. And like, it's hard to connect. And so authentic listening in a virtual setting, I mastered because all of our classes were virtual. And so it's really allowed me to build deeper, stronger, more trusted relationships everywhere. Like I, have great friend conversations. I have great family conversations. I can meet somebody at a networking event, and because I'm a bit curious about them as a human, can unlock something that's important to them. And then we connect on a bit of a deeper level than just whatever the professional element is. And then being that like attention, like fully focused, authentic listening conversationalist is a bit unique in today's world. And so
it's like very unique.
Yes. Yes.
And you are exceptional at what you do. You really, really are. Not just from our EDC days, but you helped my husband, you helped Sean and his company in one of your relationship management roles. And you are very, very, very exceptional at what you do. Like all the skills that you're naming about yourself, you deeply listen to your clients' needs. You ask very curious, true, honest questions. I actually never, ever, ever thought that coaching skills could help with sales skills. Like, I don't know why this conversation is making this click for me, but I'm like, oh, of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Of course. Like, number one, I would say to being successful at skills is building those relationships, right? Like we always talked about the trusted advisor in our corporate life, and being that trusted go-to person that it's not just they're trying to sell me something. It's like, I actually can speak about a number of things with you, and you can find me just be a listener, or you can connect me to a wider variety of things because you're paying attention to what I'm actually saying, which is really, really neat. And then the last thing that I'll say too is naturally in leadership, I'm not necessarily in a leadership role right now, but I've had different types of leadership roles over the course of the last several years, and other types of professions. Like I'm a horse person for everyone on the line. So I've always been a horse girl since I was 4 years old. And I remember going through the coach training at our graduation. So many of the women came up to me and said, because I talked about my horse a lot during our coaching time. And so many of the women at that time came up to me and said, are you going to do something with your coaching skills and horses? And I was like, what? That's so interesting. It was the first time that anybody said it to me, but it was at our graduation. And then that kind of led me down that path of exploring what I found was equine assisted learning and equine assisted wellness. It's becoming a lot more popular today. It's still my that little ember in my heart that's like, you should be doing this, Megan. Why aren't you doing this? I will give myself a bit of credit. I did
like on the next call.
Yes.
We're just growing. We're starting
We're coming back to it now. We're coming back to it.
Yeah.
But, incredibly essential skills when you're holding a session for somebody. Like the purpose of equine assisted learning or wellness is to not ride a horse, but to be on the ground with a horse, because horses can mirror so many interesting things to us. Like they look for leadership, they look for safety, they look for security. And so, you need to be calm, you need to be like a trusted presence. But, as you're working through that with people tend to be scared of horses if they haven't been around them. And so being able to kind of coach people and again, hold that safe space for them. And the purpose again of it is like, oftentimes, somebody's working through something, maybe they don't feel like they've been a leader, and we can go through different activities with equine assisted learning that help them build different leadership skills or nonverbal communication skills. And then at the end, they come out feeling incredible because it's like, oh my goodness, not overnight, I just overcome my fear of this 1,200-pound animal, but I actually did these activities with this 1,200-pound animal. And then I also learned something about myself that I am capable of doing this. And so then you end up having a bit of a coaching conversation. Like you ask those open-ended questions, like, how does that make you feel? Like, what are you experiencing? What's different for you now? And so being able to bring these skills into that vocation was incredible. And then I did have the opportunity to lead somebody in my regular 9 to 5 job last summer. We had our summer student. And at the end of that term, it was the greatest compliment of life. He was like, "You've been the best leader that I've ever had." And I was like, I don't know if you've ever had any other leaders. So let's hope that there's a bit of a comparison ability here. But, it was going into like when you have those frequent one-on-one conversations with somebody, what's always important for me as an employee is that I'm not just held to my performance, but I'm also able to have a conversation with my leader about many other things. Like one of my core values is professional growth and like continuous learning and evolution. I'm not good at doing the same job forever. I would not be able to do that. I want to keep evolving and keep having different experiences. But I'm also like a regular human that likes to also talk about my regular human things. Not everybody likes to do that at work, but it is important for me. And so it was important for me to go into kind of our one-on-ones with what's important for you for this conversation. And would you like to just work on achieving X, Y, and Z, or do you want to have different types of conversations? And then, how can I help you work through some of those? I think anybody early on and even mid and end of career is wondering what are they doing with themselves and where are they going next and how do they work through things? So I do know that being a good leader means that you can have coaching conversations and hold space for people and ask open-ended questions and be curious. Like if you're just a manager, it's because you're just telling the person what they need to do and how they're doing it and so on. If you're a true leader, it's because you can really connect with that person, have deeper conversations. So yeah, coaching skills are just transformative in so many ways.
As we come to the end of this conversation, Megan, is there any final words of wisdom that you want to share after having done this exercise of looking back at your journey and what you've learned and how you've grown and evolved? Are there any words of wisdom that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, so many. But I think if I come back to at the beginning, we were talking about kind of heroes' journeys and journeys of life. It's that like there's just so many. And so I think if I think back to 20-year-old Megan, it was like this one trajectory of life. Like, okay, we're going to go forth and conquer and we found the path. And then what 37-year-old Megan knows now is that path ebbs and flows and changes. And you go down paths that you said yes to, and then you go down paths that you didn't choose. And, it was so important for me now when I think about it. I had a good foundation, but again, like having been through learning kind of all of these skills and all of the tools that you get from the MRA especially allowed me to navigate all of those roads a little bit lighter and a little bit more intentionally. I feel like it alleviated a bit of the confusion. Like there's still always why am I here? Like if you're back down a stuck path. So again, in the last few years, I kind of felt like I got myself back into a bit of a stuck path, but at the same time, things were moving and forward. So, you're going through maybe some health challenges and then kind of wear you down and then some other relationships. And I felt like I was kind of worn down a bit energetically again. But at the same time, I was still, I made a few different changes in my career over the last several years at the same time. And so there's times where you can, like I knew in my career, I was like, this is challenging. This is not it. I'm burning out. I need to make a change. And I did that a couple of times in the last few years. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's parts of your life where that might be easier to make those changes and to be like, I'm going to be a bit bold on this path. Like this isn't working. So I'm going to shift that. And then there's other parts of your life where that might be a bit harder. And for me, that does end up being sometimes relationships or, some of those deeper things. And I'm sure it's similar for a lot of people and different for others, but it's okay. Like, you might have these grand plans for yourself and some of them might work out and some of them might take you down different roads. And what I've come through in this year, like at the beginning of this year, I was like, okay, I now have this opportunity again with like family health settling and like new job being settled. And like, I was kind of into my new job and, had bought the house like transition of buying a house and settling a house and paying for all the things up front had started to settle. So I was like, okay, I'm starting 2025 in this with a bit of an opportunity to come back to myself and replenish that energy again. And so for me, that meant taking 3 weeks off and doing back-to-back retreats, which I know I'm very privileged that I was able to gift myself that. But it was a bit of a call, honestly, to come back to the MRA container that I remembered. Like, I said to myself, I'm like, I really miss those deep conversations that we had as a group of women in the MRA. And I really miss, like, there was like this holistic nature. Everybody had, I learned what it meant to kind of have wellness in my life in a number of different ways, like what meditation was and what, even just nice songs, and then yoga and movement and breath, like that stuff all came through our MRA courses as well, too, just with women doing different vocations. And so I said to myself, I'm like, what Megan needs right now is nurturing. Like, I've done a good job at making it through, and I've, been able to support myself, and I've been able to feel the emotions, and I'm lucky that I have great people around me too that have supported me through that. But what I need right now, like, I've made the changes. I'm in a job where I'm excited and I'm energized again, but I don't feel like my energy's fully there. And so I need nurturing, and not going to be able to go back to 2019 and 2020 and do the MRA again, but I could choose a women's retreat that had a bit of the same energy. And so I did do that. I went on a beautiful women's retreat in Mexico, and it did offer a lot of that same energy. And, we had focal points that we were talking about each day. We had deep conversations. There was lots of vulnerability. There was movement. There was creativity. There was, you're on a beach watching whales in the ocean. Like, it was just ridiculously magical. And so I was lucky that I did do those things for me. And that really set me up to come back for the rest of the year and say, okay, this is like what I need. I need to change this. I need to say yes to these things. I need to give myself a chance to move forward. And so it's still been a tough but fun year. Like, there's still been a bit of a bumpy road. What I found really interesting lately is how they're talking about, in Chinese astrology, this was the year of the snake, and it's all about shedding, like removing the layers and the things that aren't working for you anymore. And I was like, that was 2025 for me. I said no to a few things that were really taking a bunch of energy from me. And it really was kind of like peeling away those layers of like, okay, let's release this. Let's release that. Let's get back to the core and the essence of what it is that we want. And then closing 2025, I wanted to go on another trip, because I was at that point too where I'm like, I love trips and I love being by the ocean and in the sun. And I find they always re-energize me. So I did one last trip, which again, I thought was going to be a bit more of this closing of the year reflection. It was a solo trip. So I thought I'd be journaling and, prepping for this conversation. So having a bit of that reflective time. So I was like, oh, isn't that nice? It was in Mexico as well. So I'm like, isn't it nice that I started the year with this nurturing retreat in Mexico and places, and then I'm going to close this year on this solo reflective vacation in Mexico. And it ended up being something completely different. I'll share a very quick story, but when I landed in Mexico, I went to this town called Puerto Escondido. So I landed in Puerto, hop into the taxi. I'm going to my Airbnb. And there's not a lot of traffic, but we get to this one point where there was traffic. And I look at the taxi beside me, and there's a woman in there that I recognize from my hometown. And
wow,
I'm pretty sure that's so-and-so from my hometown. So I'm like, you know what? Send her a message. We're more like acquaintance, haven't really spoken in, maybe over 9 years, but are in the same city and, have kind of that social media connection, if you will. Sent her a message and said, are you in Puerto Escondido, Mexico? She replies, I am. Are you coming? And I said, I'm in the taxi beside you. And she looks over and was like, oh my goodness. And so what I thought was going to be this like solo reflective, what I thought I needed at the end of the year trip, ended up being a gift of, she's also like Aries energy matched with me. So it was a little bit of that like Aries fire energy spark that I needed again. Mm-hmm. But she had been there for a few weeks. She had friends. She had, a bit of a lay of the land. And so it ended up being like a fun, adventurous trip. And when I came back from that, I said, it's funny how I went into that thinking I needed nurturing again. And I came out of that realizing the universe said, no, you need a spark again. You need fire. You need fun. So I'm going to hand that to you in this insane form of somebody that you barely speak to in a taxi that you needed right now.
Wow.
And so, being open to, it's okay that we get stuck sometimes, and then, move through it when you need it. Like, take the time that you need to get out to the other end. But now that I've kind of come out to that other end and I started, doing the things to get my energy back and to get back to where I wanted to be, it's like the universe is starting to conspire again, right? Like, it's always there. My mom said it to me the other day. She's like, I kind of feel like your lucky horseshoe was never gone. Like, that golden horseshoe never left you, but you're coming back to it. Like, it's back. Things are happening again. Things are moving again. And so anyways, Chinese astrology 2026 is year of the horse, the fire horse. And,
that's your animal.
I don't know. I was like, well, if we're going into a horse year and a fire year, which is in my sun sign of Aries, then it's all about forward momentum. It's all about leadership. It's all about, stepping into something that you've been putting off. So it feels like it's going to be a really exciting big year. And yeah, I'm just really excited and ready for it. So
wow, your energy is infectious. I'm feeling excited just listening to you.
Thank you.
Megan, thank you so much for sharing your story and for reflecting on your journey. It's just been such a joy to reconnect with you and to hear the journey mapped out. It's really beautiful to hold that for you and to share that with you.
I'm going to give you one final serendipitous universal magic experience so thank you for giving me the gift to speak on your platform. I was listening to one of your podcast episodes with Michelle, I don't know, before I went to Mexico. I was listening to you guys and I said, it'd be so neat to do a podcast. I've always thought about what would I speak about on a podcast. And then I was like, I wonder what Taryn and I would talk about if we did a podcast. And honest to goodness, 2 hours later, you were in my email inbox saying, hey, Megan, it's me. Any chance you want to join a podcast episode with me for this legacy series? And I was like, seriously, universe? But
once you open to it, right?
Yes.
Once you just open back up to it, it's like there's periods of time where I totally resonate with that. I feel so closed to it that the magic disappears. And I'm like, where was the magic I once felt? Like, where did it go? Exactly. And then you open back up to it. And then poof, like all of a sudden, opportunities, serendipities, doors opening just comes. Yeah. And magic is back.
Magic's back. Magic never left.
Magic never left. Like, to your mom's point.
Yeah.
Magic never left. It's just our ability to open to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you too.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for listening to Legacy Lived on the Mind Rebel podcast. If this episode invited reflection on the legacy you're living, you can explore our work at www.themindrebel.com.